Hi everyone! The reason I made this video is because we actually get a lot of questions about our bed setup, irrigation, our hoop houses, how big are they? And so I wanted to give you guys a tour of everything before the growing season really hits us while we're still all in setup mode. I have recruited Steve to help me with this one so that we can have a little bit more of an in-depth discussion about the costs and what things we find are worth it and how things kind of work. But before I go and find him, I thought I would give you a little bit of context as to our farm business and what our focuses are. So we are located in a cut flower production hub in southwestern British Columbia, Canada. We farm on just under 4.5 acres, and we've diversified into a few revenue streams, which includes the flowers. We also produce eggs for our community, and we raise Nigerian dwarf dairy goats. And in terms of the flower component, our focus is really on direct to consumer sales. We do a little bit more of a higher end design style, and we're pushing into a lot of the seasonal events with larger price point items. So what that looks like right now in terms of our gardens or our crops is that I'm growing on about a 1/4 acre. And that is broken down into 3 areas. So what I have is I have an annual field that is also starting to turn more and more into perennials. I have the hoop houses, which is where I grow most of my dahlias, and we can do a little bit of season extension there. And then I also have a high focus on perennial production in my landscaped sort of cottage garden perennial beds. So let's go and find Steve now so that we can have a closer look at how we have set up these 3 different growing areas. All right, so let's head to the annual field for starters. Each of our fields is set up a little bit differently. One of the big things about the annual field is that we have grass walkways. Do you want to talk a little bit about how we ended up settling on grass for our walkways?
We started off with dirt walkways, but it seemed like there was always just weeds. It wasn't very aesthetic. It wasn't even user friendly for walking in, doing maintenance, doing weeding, harvesting. So we decided that we'd give grass a try because it's something that we could just kind of mow every 4 or 5 days because we do irrigate. So the grass grows really well. And they turned out awesome. We made it wide enough that we could use our ride-on lawnmower. I think I have about a 46-inch wide deck, and I mow it in the summer probably every 4 or 5 days, and it looks beautiful.
Yeah, and like, what do you have on your feet right now?
Flip-flops.
Yeah, so this is the weather we have right now. I have flip-flops on too. And the wonderful thing about the grass is that I can come out here not in boots. I don't have to deal with dirt or mud. It's really nice that way.
Yeah, and even if we're working out here, like the kids will come out here in the summer, in their shorts and bare feet, and they can walk up and down the rows. It's kind of fun. And from a distance, it's very aesthetically pleasing compared to dirt or even, any sort of fabric walkways.
And so besides the aesthetic, one of the things that we noticed after we put the grass in as well is that it was a really good fit for our climate and our soil type. We have a little bit of a lower field here in terms of elevation, and we get a little bit more of issues with a bit of flooding or water retention or a high water table. And we live in a really rainy climate. So one of the nice things about having the grass is it acts as basically a permanent cover crop that protects the soil, but it also acts to help absorb and handle a lot of the moisture that's coming in. So I don't really regret the grass, although one of the downsides is that then we have to constantly be maintaining the edges. And I have a lot more weed pressure coming in from the fact that I'm not growing in sort of like a sterile environment without any weeds in the surrounding areas. So I'm creating more work for myself that way. So it's definitely a bit of a trade-off that way.
Yeah, it's not a perfect solution, but I think for us, it's probably the best fit.
Yeah, the flower bed widths here are 36 inches, and then the length of the beds is about 100 feet. And up until this year, we were growing on 6 rows, so we had 600 feet by 36 inches of growing space, which is mostly annuals, although there are some perennials down here as well. And we've just reduced our number of beds now down to 5 rows. That was a lot to do with not having to hand mow the 1 row.
Yeah, some of our walkways were a little tight. I think they were only about 40 inches wide. So we'd use a push mower. And then the challenge is, even if it's 42-inch wide, I can get in there with the mower in the early season. Once your kind of crop comes in, it kind of hangs over. And then I couldn't get in the last 2 rows. So for simplicity, we thought, you know what, let's not kill ourselves. Let's just delete 1 row.
Yeah, and in terms of like the loss of production of that 100 feet, I'm not really too worried about it because over the last number of years, I've been slowly growing my perennial crops and adding more perennial gardens, which play an integral role nowadays in the production for what I do. And I would be happily leaning into more perennials anyways. And I think that I can handle the loss of space for some of the annuals that maybe aren't as important. So let's head into the hoop houses next.
Have you checked the temperature differences?
Yeah, they're pretty warm. That one's not quite as warm. What is it right now?
27.3, 33% humidity. Let's check this one. 27.3, 33% humidity. Oh, this one's in the sun, so it's not fair. 52.4.
This is one of our hoop houses. So
what's it called, the hoop house, Marie?
I don't know what. I sometimes just call this one my dahlia house because this is where all the dahlias are. This is the sunrise house.
Yeah, I got to make a sign for it. I like that. Sunrise house, because that way is east. And our other house is the?
Sunset house. That was hard.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to make a sign for the other house too. I may have to make a few things for my wife also here.
Yeah, just so that I can find my way around my own garden.
My goodness.
So these are an exciting thing to kind of work with. And I think maybe when we put these up, we didn't have a huge plan to grow a lot of flowers in these, but it's become something that has been absorbed into the flower production. And what we've been playing a lot with is season extension, because with this kind of structure, I can be harvesting certain flowers up to 6 weeks early compared to the field grown. And it also gives us extension on the other end. It protects from some of the initial frosts in the fall, and it extends our season that way as well. So yeah, it's been really, really good. So this one is basically filled with dahlias, and I rotate my dahlias back and forth. So this year they're in the sunrise house again. Do you want to talk a little bit about where these are from and sort of the size? A lot of people would like to know how big the greenhouses are and our sort of setup.
Sure. Yeah, these are commercial greenhouses. This particular one is 20 feet wide. And the height I would take, I think it's 10 foot high at the peak. And we bought one that was 20 foot wide by 100 feet long. And because we're not commercial growers, we thought for kind of aesthetics and beauty, it'd be nice if we built 2 of them. So not as efficient in the sense you have to have double the amount of end walls here, gable end walls, but looks a lot nicer. So ours are effectively, I guess now 20 feet wide by 45 feet long.
Yeah, so you took one large commercial style greenhouse and you split it in half.
Correct.
You purchased the end parts that you needed.
Correct.
To add to that, and then created 2.
Yeah, they're fairly straightforward. If you're handy and you buy them used or new, you can put them together yourself with just 2 people, in the sense that it's just nut and bolt and some self-tapping
like
sheet metal screws. Yeah, like you need to have at least one person who knows what they're doing.
The muscle.
And then you got to have a helper, the muscle for the helper. And you don't need that helper all the time. They can do other things, tend to their gardens while you're making things. Yeah, it's galvanized metal frame. It's plastic on we use plastic on both the end walls and plastic on the whole structure with roll-up sides. The plastic, it has to be replaced. I think you can get anywhere from kind of 3 to kind of 6 or 7 seasons out of your plastic. Fairly easy to install. Just don't do it on a windy day. Yeah, and we're on this is going to be year 4 for our plastic.
Yeah.
So it's doing well. It's holding up well. The snow can be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, we actually have the video of us babysitting
Mm-hmm.
our hoop houses a bit in the snow weather
Yeah.
and the unique type of snow that we get here in sort of our warm climate.
Yes.
You know.
Our bracing on these greenhouses is every 5 feet. We have, you can see the structure every 5 feet. And then it's cement into the ground. And some people try to put them on 6x6 posts or try to do some other things, but it's basically a 1 foot diameter cement hole that's 3 feet into the ground every 5 feet on both sides. And you need that for wind because a lot of times you'll put greenhouses in a flat area, you'll level them out, and then if you get windstorms,
They turn into a parachute.
yeah, it's a sail.
And one thing in particular that we do if we know we're getting wind is we shut everything down, doors closed, everything should be closed, just to prevent the wind from getting in there and sort of lifting and causing damage.
And cost wise, if you're going to buy new, I don't think we would buy new. We bought used. You can buy new. It's just I think it's cost prohibitive because you're not going to pay it off with this crop. They're fairly expensive, these greenhouses. They're galvanized, etc., etc. So cost of something like this new is probably like $15,000 each. So that's like $30,000 for these two structures. And I just don't think it'd be worth it. It would take a lot of years to try to pay that off. But you can find them used, and you can get parts readily available if you buy the right style used. You don't kind of get a homemade one. You get one that's from a commercial grower or a commercial farmer of some sort. Then you can buy parts for it quite easily.
In terms of what to be growing in a hoop house like this and what's going to be worthwhile to offset the cost and everything else, I'll tell you what I've been using mine for, but there's so many more options for what you could be growing in these. And it's also very location dependent, and it's dependent on your climate and your market as to which crops are going to be really good cash crops. So it'll potentially take a little time to try things out and to kind of research your own location and see what might be worthwhile. As I mentioned, I use one of our hoop houses basically entirely for dahlias. One of the things that I love about growing in the hoop house for the dahlias is I love that they're growing under cover. It protects the bloom quality on my dahlias very well. It keeps them protected from rain and from wind. And also, besides the season extension, the bloom quality component is really helpful for me. The other one, I play around a lot more with annuals, especially starting my cold hardy annuals, which are flowers like Beplorum and Larkspur. Based on my last frost date, I can start those even earlier than I could in the field because I have some sort of protection from frost. And we also just personally use the greenhouses for sort of warm weather lovers, summer lovers.
Yes.
Tomatoes are amazing. We were harvesting tomatoes out of one of our greenhouses last year well into October.
Yes.
Even growing through the winter, if you're more interested in having a few vegetable crops, for example. We had leeks coming out of here, I think in like December.
November, December, yeah.
So there's
parsley,
some other
everything
things
just gets extended.
Yeah, you can be playing with those.
Nice, yeah.
And back to cold hardy annuals, you could also be sowing those in the fall and then just overwintering them in the hoop houses. So there's lots of different ways that we end up using these. I also like to grow my zinnias. A lot of times I'll be growing my zinnias in my hoop houses, again, because they love warm weather. They love drier weather. They don't do so great with the kind of cold and long springs that we have here. So playing around and getting to know your own location, your own climate, will really sort of guide you into what sort of uses you could put hoop houses to. And then in terms of ventilation, there's different ways that you can put ventilation into these structures. So what we have are roll-up sides. So the roll-up sides we have on all sides of all of our greenhouses. So they go, as you can see, they'll go about halfway up here. So in the summertime, like if I have my dahlias in here, I'll actually have those basically permanently up until the weather starts to get cool, because otherwise it would be too hot in the greenhouses. All right, so I just want to show you what we've got going on in here. So this, as I mentioned, is the sunrise house. We have our dahlias already planted. We are about 4 weeks out from our last frost date, and I've already planted my dahlias, which have been waking up already for the past roughly 6 weeks. So I have a video on my storage and my waking up process, which I will link in this video. Now we're at the stage where we're planting, and I always still get a little bit nervous about planting my dahlias this early. It's really important that I get the soil temperatures up as high as I can. So what we've got going in here right now, what you're seeing is we have our walkways, which are 18 inches. They're covered in landscape fabric. We don't actually grow a lot of our crops in landscape fabric here. So I actually just have fabric on top of my beds. And that is just to help to warm the soil because the tubers are in there. And they really don't like cold, damp conditions. It can rot them out. So I'm just hoping that by adding the layer of landscape fabric on here, it will just give even more warmth to the soil. As I mentioned, the walkways are landscape fabric. We used to just do dirt walkways, and it's similar to the annual field. It's just a pain for maintenance. And when we started out, we thought, okay, well, we'll just till our walkways every so often to deal with the weeds. But the problem is then we would be walking on soft dirt over and over again. And so it just wasn't that great of a system. And then the bed width in here is a little bit narrower. So the bed width in here is 30 inches.
Yeah, 2.5 feet. And the big reason there and our narrow walkways was we have a 20-foot wide greenhouse. So we wanted to try to get at least 4 growing rows in. And we just couldn't fit 5 because it does curve down at the sides. So this gives us 4 growing rows for the greenhouse. We kind of maximize the space, and you'll see later this summer on YouTube when the dahlias are in bloom, the whole greenhouse is basically like from my height, about 6 feet to side, 20 feet wide. It's just full of greenery and bloom. So
Yeah,
we do utilize the space
it
quite
does,
well.
yes. If anything, I wouldn't mind wider walkways sometimes.
Yeah.
So in terms of the irrigation, we are using the same type of irrigation throughout.
Yeah, everywhere on our flower fields, in the greenhouses. We use drip irrigation, and if you look down, you can see the emitters here, and they're on 1 foot spacing. So you can see there's one here, and then there's one here, and then we run 2 rows in our 30-inch wide beds. So our irrigation is 1 foot apart and then 1 foot on the lengthwise. And the nice thing with a drip irrigation like this is there's tons of water savings. I believe ours is like 0.6 gallons per hour per emitter. Of course, you can get different ones. Not all drip irrigation is created equal. This is a very high quality one. You can buy things like drip tape that you have to throw out, annually, or maybe you get 2 seasons out of it. This one, you get a long time out of it. When I was buying it from the supplier, I was asking, it was commercial place, and I said, well, how long, what's the longevity here? And this very tall Dutchman looked at me and he says, for you, it'll last you the rest of your life. And I think he was wanting to say, it's 15, 20 years plus on this, and it's been awesome. These little emitters kind of have like a manifold inside, so when if soil goes in, it doesn't clog them up. They're phenomenal, and it's not just like a little puncture in a hose. Upfront cost, this will be more on the high end of your drip irrigation, but overall cost a lot lower for the amount of water. So your well's not running as much, and if you're paying, per cubic foot or cubic meter of water, you're paying a lot less because you're irrigating just the area you need. You're not irrigating everything else around it. So, and fairly user-friendly to handle. If you can see here, you can pull these apart very easily just with some, screwdrivers and wrenches. And so you have your main line. You can do PVC, but we didn't. We did a flexible line, and then you have your side drip from that, and you can do it any configuration you like.
And then what we have is we have different watering zones.
Correct. Yeah, we have our, essentially we could set up our 2 greenhouses separately. We run them on the same, and then our field we run separately, just because our well house is we only have a 3/4 horse pump, and our well is only about 100 feet deep. So if you had a larger pump, you could run more, but after a while, right, you're going to lose pressure at the ends of your lines if you run too many zones on just the one well.
What time of day? Like, let's talk about that's a common question. Like, when should we be watering? What do we do in terms of timing?
Yeah.
in terms of,
Yeah.
sort of what works for us.
Yeah, so watering again, yeah, exactly. Depends on what climate you're in, what crop you're growing. It gets really complex. But some of the big ones are if you're using any sort of watering, but especially for us with drip, is we do it in the early morning hours. So before the sun rises, and then it's usually off by the time we get up out of bed. So we're not kind of, stressing our well out too much, but that just gives the plants a chance to drink, and it doesn't get them, wet in the evening. So you don't have slug problems, you don't have mold or mildew problems as much when you irrigate in the morning. And we have ditch lines on both sides of our flower field, and there's just tons of slugs because there's tall grass and shrubs. So that's part of the challenge. We used to do it kind of every other day, a longer water. We found it's better if we do it daily and just shorten the duration of our water. So, typically we're only kind of watering for an hour in each zone daily in that kind of 5 a.m., 4 a.m. range. And then we have it all set up on timers, just fairly simple timers. You can do all sorts of sophisticated timers, but we use fairly simple timers and they work really well.
Yeah, and
And
they actually, depending on the complexity, like we can actually set our timers up to be watering every other day. We can choose which day of the
yeah,
week. We can really customize it.
we
One of the
prefer.
biggest things which we've learned with gardening is to not be watering by hand. It is so
Yeah,
crucial. Like we could spend the entire summer just
yeah,
watering.
yeah. It's silly if you're gonna water by hand. A small garden, sure, if you just live in the city or in town. But if you're doing anything on any sort of scale, you really got to set up automatic watering.
Yeah.
If you're not using drip, but just do yourself a favor, spend the $80-$90 and get yourself a good quality automatic timer. Yeah, it'll save your life and it'll grow your crop a lot better.
All right, so now we're just circling right back to my perennial garden because there's a couple of things that I was very strategic about when I set up these gardens. So what we did when we set up this garden was that we wanted it to be aesthetically pleasing for us. We have it more in our sort of personal home space of our yard. It wraps around the side of our house and then all the way around the back of our house and around our patio. And so when we were designing it, we wanted to find a balance between having a certain amount of aesthetic appeal as well as still having practicality and efficiency for production. So one of the key differences with this garden is that instead of straight rows, we've done curved rows. And if we were to complete this garden all the way around the house, it would be a perfect circle. The walkways are wide again, as you can see, similar to the flower field. These are wide to fit our ride on to save us valuable time. And one of the most important features with this garden is how I planted this garden up, because what I did was to achieve some sort of efficiency still as a productive garden, I grouped my perennials. So things are actually planted in groups in kind and things are not mixed in, and I don't tend to have border rows and middle rows and back rows. It's one thing at a time, which makes it really helpful for me still when I'm coming in and I'm wanting to harvest. It doesn't slow me down too much, and it's still really an efficient garden for production, but because of the curvature of it, it's also really, really beautiful for us. And these beds are about 36 inches wide, but we didn't really set the bed width for these ones in terms of any particular sort of crop spacing or crop plan. It's maybe an arbitrary number. It does work really well for me to get, maybe 3 to 4 plants in terms of planting depth in terms of my spacing, but we didn't actually set that intentionally. And yeah, I often will say this is my favorite spot on the whole farm. When this thing is in bloom, it is really wonderful, and I'll never regret having put in a perennial sort of my twist on a cottage cutting garden like this. So I hope this video was helpful to you. I hope it helped you to sort of see kind of the structures in place behind how we're running our farm for the purposes for which we're running it. Let us know if you have any questions. I can always wrangle Steven to help me answer more technical questions. I hope we kind of were able to kind of give you a pretty good idea of what we're working with. I've also just recently had a really nice chat with my friend Jessie at Bear Flower Farm, where we dive a little bit more into my motivations and the structures that I have in place to run my business and sort of some of my priorities and some of the things that I don't do as a farmer florist. So I will link that video in the comments as well if you want to check out our conversation and sort of pick up some more additional tips for how to be successful as a farmer florist. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.